Guys, after 100 hours on Warrior, I was convinced by chat to make another character. Not for any other reason, I promise. It was literally chat that said, hey, you should play the Witch class. Now, it's a good chance you've already seen Witch in action. It is the minion necromancer class, if you will, which is exactly what we played back in Diablo 4 when it first launched. We were a necromancer main, except the difference was back then, the meta for necro was actually not to use your minions. Instead, it was all about building into bone and doing a ton of damage while subsequently sacrificing all of your minions. However, in Path of Exile 2, Witch is all about overwhelming your enemy. I'm talking a horde of minions pouring out and overtaking everything. Guys, if you're looking for a class to take you from start to finish, and I mean literally start to finish, all through the game, all 4 ascensions, even into endgame, to tier 15 maps and beyond, then I present to you the Infernal Witcher. Now, this is kind of a twist on a build that maybe you've already come across. And it's actually a build that was cooked up by one of our guild members, Carmelo, who's really been the guiding hand for me throughout my time playing this class. Now, something I want to stress about when making these builds is 9 times out of 10, we talk about builds from the perspective of in-game. Today, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to start from the very beginning. Our early game build, our mid-game build, our in-game build, and then our in-game build. Now, despite how it may sound, you'll be cooking literally from the very moment you start playing this class. The right skill setups, the right support gems, you'll be flying through every act of the campaign with a little more than a click of a button. So let's get started. Now, if you check our link down below to maxroll.gg, you'll see exactly how everything is laid out. Let's start with very early game. Now, this is very early, as if you had just walked out of the tutorial, but it's a good chance you have a rattling scepter in your inventory. I want you to take that and put that in your main hand. If you got a shield, put that in your offhand. And I want you to remember this and take this to heart as a witch. You're not meant to do a lot of damage. If you want to go do damage with spells, go play sorcerer. Your entire identity is all about making minions and buffing the piss out of them. Now, with the rattling scepter, you'll have access to skeletal warrior minions. This is really good because this will essentially give you a warrior that can do damage, but even better than that, can tank damage. Now, our other 3 abilities we're going to be using is Contagion, Unearth, and Skeletal Sniper. Now, Skeletal Sniper is really a placeholder ability. The goal is eventually get up to where we can use Skeletal Arsonist. That at level 6 is the big upgrade. But for the time being, at least early on, yes, you'll be using Skeletal Snipers. Now, if you're already leveled up and you have Arsonist available, definitely use Arsonist. These are the summons that will replace your archers, and they recently got a nerf, making them slightly cost more in spirits, placing them at the same cost as other skeletal mages, but this really doesn't hurt them all that much. And let me just say, Arsonist overall put out a ton of damage when combined with certain abilities. Now, the other 2 abilities that you're not going to be using in in-game, but they're very good early on, include Contagion and Unearth. 2 abilities that actually synergize well with each other. You've got Contagion, which spreads chaos damage over time to enemies, and when that enemy dies, they then spread that debuff to other enemies. And then you have Unearth, which does a decent amount of damage, but its main purpose is to summon tons of these extra little minions. These little scorpion things running around. They don't necessarily do a lot of damage, but you can get an army of them going. And if you combine this with Contagion, you can literally have purple scorpions running around after killing enemies with Contagion and then using Unearth on that enemy's corpse. Now, in terms of skill gems you should use on these abilities, keep in mind if you're a new player, completely ignore this. You probably don't have a lot of support gems available. However, this is your second run through. Early on for Skeletal Sniper, both Scattershot and Last Gas are great support gems to place on Skeletal Sniper. Fellas, you do these things as well as using your Rattling Scepter for those 2 free Skeletal Warrior minions, which cost you no extra spirits, you are set. And if you could snag Meat Shield as a support gem for Skeletal Warriors, that'll make them deal more damage and it'll make them tankier. Now, the main resource you're going to get used to when playing the Witch class is your spirits. If you look there at the bottom right, guys, this resource called Spirit is actually what you use to summon minions. Let me just say early on, you're not going to have a whole lot. Now, if you happen to get your hands on certain uniques, maybe it's your second playthrough, and you may even want to check some of your stash because some of these items may just be chilling there. Enfolding Dawn Pilgrim Vestments, which gives you 100 spirits, the Oak Sworn Sigil Crest Shield, which I still use even in in-game, which gives you 50 spirits, and the Bones of Oler. These don't improve your spirit, but they do allow your undead minions to have 20% reservation. Now, don't kill yourself if you don't have these items. It does, of course, make things easier, but not all 3 of these are absolutely necessary. Now, let's begin when you reach level 6. As soon as you reach level 6, guys, you need to be applying Skeletal Arsonist and removing the archers. And for Arsonist, you're going to need the support gems, Scatter Shot, and Fire Infusion. Now, if it's your second playthrough, you have additional Lesser Jewel Orbs, feel free to apply that to give yourself a 3rd slot, and now you can use Immolate. This allows for Arsonists to gain 30% of damage as extra fire damage against ignited enemies, at the cost of not being able to ignite enemies themselves. Now, why use a gem that requires enemies to be ignited if we don't have a way to ignite them? That's where our next 2 skills come into play: Raging Spirits and Flame Wall. You see, guys, it's these 2 abilities alongside our Arsonists that are the backbone of this build, and is essentially what's going to take you all the way through in-game. Let's start with Raging Spirits. These are flaming skulls that are summoned via using other fire spells. Now, it costs roughly 30 spirit to have these active, and it has a limit of 10 skulls present at a time. Now, we use this in combination with Flame Wall to spawn 5 Raging Spirit, and with each of these being cast, this allows our Arsonists to throw through the Flame Wall, dealing additional fire damage. Now, if you're hitting your skill gems, guys, you're like, dude, I don't see these abilities. Again, uncheck the recommended gems. You can literally search it in the bar down below, and you can track down Flame Wall, and then for Raging Spirits, that'll be a Spirit Gem. Now, back to Raging Spirits. Now, it's here we use Infernal Legion, which causes them to take 20% of their maximum life as fire damage per second, which will cause them to ignite enemies within a 1.5 meter radius. Now, this is perfect because on top of Flame Wall, we have an additional way to ignite enemies, allowing for that 30% extra damage from our Arsonist with Immolate. Now, the rest of the gems on Raging Spirits are Minion Instability, which causes them to explode when reduced to low life, and Feeding Frenzy, which grants 30% more damage at the cost of taking 20% more damage, which is actually perfect for Raging Spirits as they actually can't be targeted by enemies. Now, as for the Flame Wall, we use Arcane Tempo for faster cast speed and Fortress. Now, what Fortress does is that it allows our flame walls to be placed in a circle rather than a one-sided wall. Now, you may think this sounds counterintuitive, but it actually works because as we cast flames directly on top of enemies, our Arsonists can throw through that wall, and this allows the enemy to be completely encircled by the flames, ensuring that maximum damage is being achieved. Now, we also use Spell Cascade for a bit, which allows us to spawn 3 flame walls on cast rather than a normal one, which is really nice if you can achieve that. The next skill we unlock is arguably one of the most important though, and is actually tied to our Infernalist Ascension. Now, you're not going to be able to pick this up until around level 20 to 25, but once you're able to grab your first 2 Ascension points, the best route in my opinion is the Infernalist Ascension Tree, and more specifically, the Loyal Hellhound. Now, this will give you a free Hellhound summon that costs 0 spirits, and it allows 20% of the damage you take from hits to be taken from its life before yours. This is great for survivability, and you're going to be using this even in the end game. Now, for support gems, I would first take Fire Exposure and Strip Away, and this allows our Hellhound to act as a debuffer, applying Fire Exposure for 8 seconds upon an enemy being ignited, and then Strip Away, which will boost that debuff by an extra 30%. Now, we're going to eventually add Meat Shield here, which will give us 50% more maximum life to our Hellhound at the cost of them dealing 35% less damage, which is fine. They're not really meant to be dealing a whole bunch of damage. We just want him to be able to tank a whole lot of damage. Now, at this point in time, we'll also put both Brutality and Overpower on our Skeletal Warriors. Now, the last 2 skills I'm going to go over quickly help tremendously in the damage department. One of them is Pain Offering. This essentially allows you to impale one of your minions, which will then buff all of your other minions in the surrounding 6 meter radius, and it is a hell of a buff. We're talking 30% extra attack speed, 44% more damage, and for the support gems on this one, you want to use Magnified Effect and Font of Rage. Now, lastly, we have Flame Ability, which is perfect for our Witcher Infernalists. It curses enemies in its radius, lowering their fire resistance. So as you see here, guys, we've got buffs, we've got debuffs, we're dealing a lot of fire damage. And for our support gems, we want to use Inspiration, Hide Curse, and Focus Curse. Now, that's the main meat of this build, and this is going to carry you all the way to in-game. And when I say carry you, I mean literally carry you. When you're playing Witch, and especially once you get Infernalists unlocked, keep in mind, you are not a big damage dealer yourself. You're not supposed to be running straight into the enemy. And I actually found this out the hard way because I was literally trying to play like a warrior, but on the witch class, which would result in me dying. The goal is literally just to set up your minions, throw down your flame walls, let your raging spirits and your arsonists go to Pound Town, and just keep recasting your flame wall, and occasionally hit the enemies that are thick with flame ability. And just make sure to throw in Pain Offering to buff up your minions, and you're good, fellas. Outside of that though, guys, spirit is the most important thing. The more spirit you have, the more minions you can spawn. And when you go there into your skill menu, you can select how many arsonists you want to have on the battlefield. And that's really what you want to max out as much as you possibly can. Now, outside of a few gear pieces that we're going to have listed here on the screen that provide spirits, let me just say things like amulets can provide spirits. That shield that I still use even in in-game, the Oak Sworn Sigil Crest Shield, that one provides good spirit. And then if you just come across another Rattling Scepter, always be on the lookout for those guys. It's not just the level of the Skeletal Warrior minions that it provides that's so important, but it's other factors like the spirit increase that it gives you. The other attribute to always be looking for, an increase in level to your minion skills. If you come across anything that's like +1 to level of all minion skills, or +2 or +3 even, fellas, lock that in. Do not get rid of that. These are free levels that are being handed out to all of your skills that are minion based, which is exactly what everything we're using here is related to. And that means bonuses all across the board. Now, on the topic of spirit, there are ways you can increase it throughout the campaign. You definitely want to be hitting the Bog Witch twice, once on normal and again on cruel difficulty. This will give you +30 spirit for killing her on normal, and then +40 spirit when killing her on cruel. That's 90 more spirit, guys. And by the way, if you missed out on any of the other permanent stat buffs that you can get throughout the campaign, we have an entire video that touches on all of those things, from resist buffs to spirit to those +2s that you can add to your passive skill tree. Now, speaking of passive skill tree, again, early game, this will be your layout. We're on this left side, we're increasing minion damage, a little bit of spell damage, but everything here is really just funneling our way to giving our minions more health, more damage, more movement speed, more cast speed. And the only really big change between early game and mid game on this tree is literally taking that skill tree and just going left. We like to work our way to this perk right here called Wide Barrier. This increases our block chance. It does reduce our global defenses, but the main takeaway for this is that this increases our own survivability. Now, keep in mind, guys, at any point in any of this, if you're like, yo, I've got a ton of stat distribution points, I've already reached essentially the mid-game tree that you have here in front of me, Cross, what should I do? We'll literally just go to the link right here and move to the next stage. You go from mid-game to respect at 6570, and that's where there's like a big jump here. Instead of us going directly to the left, we're now going to fill this T up all the way to the north of our skill tree. There's also a ton of gem sockets that you're going to be getting along the way, so check that stash. There's a lot of sapphire gems that you can get that have minion buffs. The point I want to stress here, guys, is that even in early game, from like base level witch right at the beginning of Act 1 to your first ascension, you can build this class to be one of the strongest classes in the game. And what's even more impressive about Infernalist is that there doesn't seem to be any major dip off. There's not like a point where it's like, okay, it's lethal in the beginning, but mid-game it kind of sucks, and then in-game it picks back up. This is a class, guys, that will stay strong from start to finish. And then when we get to in-game, it gets ridiculous, especially after you get all 4 ascensions. Now that brings us to the in-game. Now, some of the things that we've added here, I know not everyone is going to have access to, especially when it comes to skills with 4 or 5 slots. I don't even have 5 slots for everything, but that's all right. Even with 4 support slots for these skills, they're going to carry you just fine. And keep in mind, one of the best ways to work around this, and I know it's not the easiest thing to do, but if you don't have that greater Joral's orb and you just have lessers, you simply just want to craft yourself a skill, apply a lesser orb to it. This will now give it 3 slots, and then apply a Val orb. Now, this is purely RNG, but there is a chance that it will give you 4 slots. Now, keep in mind, once you've corrupted it, it's done. It's gone. You can't do anything else to it. So it's not like you can add a 5th slot down the road. But those Joral orbs are very, very rare. I've only come across like 2 graders my entire time playing. Yes, you can go buy some, but they are expensive. Whereas Val orbs for me drop, at least in in-game, pretty regularly. Now let's talk about the skills that you're going to be adding to your in-game build. First, we have Skeletal Cleric. This is going to be your healer of the squad. And really, you just need one of these guys I will say in like late in game, I added 2, but the support gems you want to have include Last Gasp, Minion Mastery, and Ingenuity. Now the Cleric is going to help keep our arsonists alive and even revise them if they do die. We also add on Bone Offering, which is kind of like Pain Offering, but this actually makes our minions tankier. The support gems we have is Persistence, Font of Mana, and Physical Mastery. Now by this point, you should already have another slot open for your Hellhound, of which we added Elemental Army to. This adds 30% to all elemental resistances. The goal is to make our Hellhound super tanky. If all of our minions get wiped out, our Hellhound will still be there to continue taking aggro. Now for our Raging Spirits, I added Execute. For Skeletal Warriors, I also added Brutality, and for Pain Offering, I added Ablation, as well as Font of Blood, while simultaneously dropping Magnified Effect. Now the last but most important skill we have for endgame is Grim Feast. This is a buff that costs 30 spirits, and it makes enemies or reviving minions that die in your presence have a 50% chance to drop a Grim Remnant. Now picking up these remnants grants you Energy Shield, which can also overflow your maximum Energy Shield. Now let me just say guys, this skill is stupid strong. Witches are not exactly the tankiest thing in the game, but with this skill, this allows you to survive so many situations. What this allows you to do though is to potentially double your max Energy Shield. And when we get into our passive skill tree in just a moment, you'll see just why it's so busted. Now the support gem we have on this is Clarity, and this gives us 30% increased mana regeneration rates, which is really all we need on this skill. Now before we move on to the skill trees, I do want to cover the rest of our Ascension Tree. You absolutely want to head towards Altered Flesh. Now this is an interesting one because it states that 20% of cold damage will be taken as fire damage, 20% of lightning damage will be taken as fire damage, and 20% of physical damage will be taken as chaos damage. The point of this is that there's a consolidation here for your resistances, putting more emphasis on fire damage as well as chaos. Now it's the things after Ultra Flesh that make this side of the tree so strong. Now there's 2 directions you can go. You can actually go the Bedit's Will or Bedit's Will direction. This reserves 25% of your life and will give you +1 to maximum spirit per 25 maximum life. Now this literally cuts down your life, but it gives you more offense, and substantially more offense because it gives you so much more spirits. Now the issue I ran when going for my 4th Ascension was that I was just getting killed. I had a lot of minions, I had a lot of spirits, but I would still occasionally get one-tapped, which is why Bedet's Hand may be the better choice for that 3rd Ascension. This reserves 25% of your life, but instead it states that it gives you +1 to maximum Energy Shield per 8 maximum life. So fellas, we're talking big jumps here in that Energy Shield. There's a reason why we're literally walking around with like 6,000-7,000 Energy Shield, and it can go even further than this once you're fully loaded out. And that's on top of our health. But if you complete that 4th and final Ascension, fellas, you're gonna reach that pinnacle point on Infernalist. Your character will be sitting at half health. You'll have a ton of Energy Shield, a ton of spirit, and a walking army with you at all times. Now, some things on the skill tree that really benefit me includes things like Patient Barrier, which gives us 60% increased maximum Energy Shield, but it does give us a slower start to Energy Shield recharge. That's completely fine, guys. Definitely worth the cost. Everything else is pretty much the same. The only things that kind of change up here is I do kind of lean toward this Entropic Incarnation, where minions have 13% to chaos resistance. In high tier maps, especially like rituals, where there's like a lot of chaos damage that's getting spawned in on top of you, that can help keep those minions alive. Outside of that, guys, you do have this little node, this little arch tree that I only do half of, but it'll give you increases there to your maximum overshield, with that enhanced barrier giving you the most 25% increased maximum Energy Shield and +1% to all maximum elemental resistances. The direction with the in-game tree, fellas, is literally just taking everything we can, buffing not only the damage of our minions but also their survivability now, as that's just as important. And that's essentially our build, guys. Outside of that, we do have our Atlas tree that we have listed here. Again, you don't have to go in this direction, but this is what we use. Outside of that, guys, in terms of items, the last thing I'm going to mention that really rounds out your survivability is placing a skill on your amulets. Now, Carmelo has Ancient Aegis here. I personally use Flashy Deflection, which increases my block chance by 12%. It also gives me 40% increased defenses from my equipped shield. Granted, I'm using a unique shield, so really not moving the needle all that much. Now, for those that are not familiar with the system, if you go to your skills, some of them actually have ingredients. And these are your distills that you get from deliriums on maps. Again, that's that icon right there. You do them, you kill a bunch of ads, and then at the end, you have a chance of certain distills dropping dropping for you. You then go into your skill tree, you see whatever skill that you want to add to something like an amulet, and then you can craft that skill. When you right click it, this will then open up a menu, put the right combination in and the item that you're trying to apply it to, and boom, your amulet now has that skill applied to it. Now I will say some of these get really pricey. For instance, Isolation, which is the white distilled, very pricey, and I've yet to get one to drop for me. But this is something you can do even as early as like level 75. Like you don't have to wait until level 90. And I would argue and say the quicker you do these things, the better you're going to be off. I've had certain players like Diablo players that have hopped into the streams have been like, why are you wasting certain resources or items or skills when you're only level 86? When you get to 90, those items are going to be outdated. I'm going to argue and say that those are not real Path of Exile players that are saying that, because a real Path of Exile player knows that you cannot get to level 90 without those things. This is not a game where you can go in there and be like, yo, I'm going to kill the same set of ads for the next 40-50 hours and level up. It doesn't work that way. Fellas, you will perpetually stay the same level forever. XP throttles back. This game pushes you to attack the hardest content at all times. And if you're not, your XP is heavily throttled. And not only is it throttled, every time you do die, you lose 10% of your XP. So whatever class you play, do not be looking at this as like, yo, I'll get to those things or those items or those pieces of armor or that perfect skill tree when I reach in-game. You're gonna be here for a very long time, perpetually ever, if you take that approach. Good luck getting that 3rd and 4th Ascension in that way. You gotta have a good build, and investing in it as early as you can is a must. So guys, that's it. That is our video for our Infernalist Witch. Everything from early game to mid-game to in-game. We've got the skill tree and everything listed in the description below. Check it out if you want. Big shout out to Carmelo for being the guiding hand for all of this. Our next class we're going to be tackling will be the monk class. So if I got any monks watching today's video, come by the stream, fellas. Would love to hear your advice. I'm looking for the best and nastiest build. And here soon, we're probably going to start doing build battles for Path of Exile. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.